I've gotten 2 responses to choosing to do Meet the Robinsons as my first movie Admirable animation review. The first response is that it's so great and underrated, and that they're glad that I'm giving it some spotlight, because it's frequently pushed aside and forgotten among the other Disney movies, even the ones at the time. The other side wonders why. Some of them thought that the movie was okay, nothing special, and some of them have never seen this movie at all. I am personally in the first camp. I obviously believe that this movie is beyond underrated, for reasons that I'll get into. But unlike most of what I review for Admirable Animation, I'm not surprised that this is underrated. Let me tell you about the time when this movie came out. The last movie released by Disney before this was Chicken Little. While it did give Disney a profit, critics and audiences alike absolutely hated the movie. I myself reviewed it a couple of years back if you want to know my own thoughts. However, coming to the idea of that movie and making it the way it wasn't exactly a mistake on Disney's part. Disney was in real trouble at the time, and they were in a spot that they hadn't been in since the 70s, shortly after Walt himself died. A couple of years before Chicken Little, Disney released 3 films: Treasure Planet, Brother Bear, and Home on the Range. Critics did not like Brother Bear, and they absolutely despised Home on the Range. And then there's Treasure Planet. Personally, I really like that movie. I don't mind the genre change from the source material, and in some ways, it's a lot more adult than most other Disney films. However, the critical reaction towards that movie was mixed, and unfortunately, it became one of the lowest grossing Disney films of all time. You know how The Good Dinosaur recently made only $115 million here in the United States? Treasure Planet only made $38 million domestically. It bombed horribly. The other films were far more successful, but they kept getting trumped by CGI films like Shrek. Not to mention that at the same time, Disney and Pixar were having major disagreements, sparked by whether or not Toy Story 2 would be a straight-to-DVD movie, the only kind of movie that seemed to be making Disney any kind of money. So Disney essentially shut down their 2D animation department and tried to make a CGI film of their own without Pixar, and we all know how that turned out. Meet the Robinson could have gone down a similar route. It was originally envisioned to be a ripoff or a story inspired by Back to the Future. John Lasseter took over during production and rewrote about a third of the story. Considering that the story is one of this movie's weaker aspects, I can only imagine how bad it was before he edited it. And yes, I said that we're doing an admirable animation of something that has the story as one of its weaker elements. I'm as surprised as you are. The movie lives through both its tone and its message, and we'll be getting into that as we go along. It starts on a dark and stormy night. We have the typical story of an orphan being dropped off at an orphanage. There's a sound in the background of someone running, and the baby is found. This is Lewis. We see him growing up to be quite a bit of the inventor, with his roommate Goob, who Lewis has been keeping awake with all of his inventing. Lewis is an extremely excitable and ambitious kid. He's also a bit eccentric, and his inventions tend to have a few kinks, like getting all over everyone and causing an allergic reaction. Basically, he keeps massively failing his adoption interviews with failing colors. The orphanage caretaker, Mildred, tries to console him afterwards. This isn't easy because this isn't Lewis's first failure.
Wonderful. It's not you. We just haven't found the right couple yet.
124. That's how many adoption interviews I've had. 124.
Oh, Lewis, come on now. You're exaggerating just to make your...
Yeah, the moral of this movie gets started quite early. Basically, Mildred says something that convinces Lewis that his mother probably wanted him when she dropped him off at the orphanage, but just couldn't take care of him at the time. Lewis figures that she still wants him even today, and decides to go looking for her. There's some obvious problems with that plan. Namely, no one saw her.
You can't do that. No one knows anything about her. No one even saw her.
Wrong. I saw her.
And that gets Lewis to begin building an invention that will help read his memories. We see Lewis spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to make this invention and keeping Goob up in the meantime. He even starts skipping other adoption interviews to figure out how to do this. Unfortunately, he hasn't managed to find much success in getting this invention right.
Good luck at the big game today.
Easy win. Those guys are a bunch of bums. I just hope I could stay awake.
Let me guess.
He was up all night working on his stupid project. Ah, that's good, Joe.
And that's another thing. I know some people find this aspect of the movie mixed, but I really like the comedy in this movie. It's widely varied and it sort of keeps you on your toes. There are very few jokes that don't seem to work. When the invention is finally done, Lewis is about to rush off to the science fair, but Mildred says that she's got another interview lined up for him. However, Lewis has completely given up on them, saying that he's tired of being rejected. Mildred tells him to stop turning to the past and start looking to the future, and Lewis kind of ignores her. At the science fair,
I like bow ties. I haven't slept in 8 days.
Well then, can I get you a cot or something?
Nope, I've got the caffeine patch. It's my invention. Each patch is the equivalent of 12 cups of coffee. You can stay awake for days with no side effects. Ah! Sir.
I get that the point is making her act kind of crazy, but I could still use those. I really want some of those. At the science fair, we see another kid who looks oddly suspicious. This is Wilbur Robinson.
Okay, next up is Lizzie and her fire ant farm.
That's right.
Lizzie, we talked about the fire ants. You know that they have a tendency to bite people?
Only my enemies.
That girl is hilarious, by the way. Wilbur basically kidnaps Lewis and asks him if he's been approached by a tall man in a bowler hat. He claims that he's a man from the future, and Lewis treats him as crazy as he sounds. Now, this movie does involve time travel, and like all movies ever that involve time travel ever, there are going to be many logical inconsistencies. The time travel story that has no logical inconsistencies does not have time travel. I'll talk more about them at the end, though. Wilbur thinks that he sees the bowler hat guy, but ends up messing up a couple of kids' science fair projects. No, instead we see the bowler hat guy up on stage, and this particular bowler hat seems to be robotic and very futuristic. Lewis tries to use its invention to see his mother, but because the bowler hat tampered with a couple of screws, the invention explodes like all the rest. Massive chaos ensues, and it seems like the teacher doesn't even want to deal with him. Lewis completely gives up and runs off. Wilbur chases after him, and then the bowler hat guy and his bowler hat put the machine back together and steal it. Lewis tries to figure out where he went wrong and just ends up tearing out his notes in frustration. He's done. Completely given up, and I'm sure a lot of people have been there. Wilbur tries to stop him from throwing out his blueprints, though. Once again, Wilbur claims that he's really from the future. To prove it, he takes Lewis into his time machine, and then they go to the future. I always love these futuristic settings and the kind of imagination that goes into them. However, even when in the future, Lewis keeps looking to the past. Instead of trying to repair his present, he wants to repair his past, and he wants to use the time machine to go back in time and meet his mother. In the time machine, he even tears up his blueprints completely. And then he crashes the time machine into some grass. To make matters worse, we learn that there are only 2 time machines in existence, and the bowler hat guy has the other one. So Lewis is tasked with repairing the time machine, and Wilbur makes him a deal. If he can fix it, he'll take Lewis back in time to see his mother. So we cut to the past. The bowler hat guy is going to Inventco to present the memory scanner as his own invention. This guy is one of the most underrated villains ever. His antics are absolutely hilarious.
Oh, 2 o'clock.
You're the 2 o'clock.
Yes, I am.
You're Mary Johnson.
Yes. Mary is short for,
Marion?
Can that be a boy name?
Yes.
Then yes.
They've taken the typical ineffectual villain and like ramped it up times 20. Also, he's a brony. And you have to remember, this movie came out in 2007. So yes, I'm convinced that the bowler hat guy is really from the future. Actually, that doesn't even begin to describe it. The further things go on, the more his lines and antics seem to have to do with real world phenomena that happened after this movie was released. It's crazy. However, during his invention interview, he screws it up quite badly.
What do you hope to accomplish with this?
Nothing of consequence. I simply wish to crush the dreams of a poor little orphan boy. After that, it's a little fuzzy.
You mean you haven't thought this through?
And this gets him kicked out. However, the bowler hat, which is named Doris, convinces the bowler hat guy to not give up. He changes his plan to find Lewis and get him to explain how the invention works. Back in the future, Wilbur tells Lewis that he has until tomorrow morning to get the time machine fixed up. That's when his father gets back from a business trip, and apparently that's going to get them into major trouble. Lewis says that he needs blueprints, and that leads us to meeting the second member of the Robinson family, Carl. He sees Lewis and absolutely freaks out.
That was unexpected. as was that.
The humor of this movie, by the way, is sometimes very silly. It does this style well, but I understand that's not everyone's cup of tea. Lewis is told that his hair is an absolute dead giveaway of him being from the past. I guess it's like the mullet of the late 2000s. And he is told to stay in the garage. Lewis is able to stay in the garage for about 3 seconds before being launched outside of the house. There, he begins to meet some of the other Robinsons, like the twins and a giant purple octopus. All the while, Carl is freaking out, but Wilbur stays calm, giving a rather simplistic plan. Just give Lewis a pep talk. Unfortunately, if Wilbur were to fail, there would be some serious consequences to the time stream continuum.
There's a 99.99999% chance that you won't exist.
What?
And I don't want to tell you, but I did.
Believe it or not, Wilbur is an interesting antithesis to Lewis, and is a part of what makes the moral of the movie so strong. While Lewis is obsessed over his failure, Wilbur almost thinks that they don't exist. Because Lewis is the main character, we spend a lot more time on Lewis's problem, and not so much on Wilbur's, but both attitudes are repeatedly portrayed as wrong. That's a good thing. This movie is about accepting your failures, not ignoring them. And that is a mistake that very many people make. So, Lewis runs into Bud Robinson, and then we get into the most significant problem with the movie. It's poor pacing, at least in the second act. The next segment of the movie is very fast-paced, as Lewis meets the family, and there are so many jokes and visual gags. If I could describe it, this movie is structured a lot like a pilot to a television series. We get the basic gist of this character, but we won't stop to go in too deep because we'll have an episode about her later. We get the basic gist of this character, but we won't go too deep into him because we'll have an episode about him later. It makes me wonder if it was planned to be a television series to begin with. Disney was making shows out of their other films around the same time. I mean, they made a cartoon out of Hercules, and that film was considered to be a disappointment among their shareholders. The movie throws out so many characters at once, and they each struggle to stand out. It makes you want to see more of them, and that's not always a positive thing. The only Robinsons who get significant screen time are Wilbur, Bud, and Franny. This movie is about 1 hour and 40 minutes. That is with credits. It could have really used some extra running time, but considering the rough patch that Disney was going through at the time, I'm not surprised that the movie was short for its plot. You can't exactly make a 3-hour movie when you're not doing well financially. Back to the past, the bowler hat guy runs into Goob. He got beat up by falling asleep and failing to catch the winning ball at the baseball game. Goob's coach told him to just let it go and move on, but the bowler hat guy says to dwell on it and let the hate inspire him to do wonderfully horrible things.
Heed my words, Goob. Don't let it go.
Apparently, someone wasn't a fan of Frozen. Goob points them to the roof, and Doris finds clues that let them know that Lewis and Wilbur had returned to the future. Or the present. Alright, this time travel logic has already gotten very confusing, and it's not getting better. In the garage, Lewis keeps beating down on himself, thinking that he can't build a time machine because it's way too advanced. And he's like only 12, and it's kinda scientifically impossible. But every single time, Wilbur responds with essentially the message of the movie. Keep moving forward. It's Wilbur's father's motto. Apparently, he's a very successful inventor, and has made everything from the transportation tubes to the time machine. Of course, it didn't go easy at first. That nut there is all that's left of the first prototype. Apparently, after 950 some odd tries, Cornelius Robinson keeps on trying. And finally he gets it. Lewis isn't so fortunate. The time machine he tried to repair breaks down and covers them both in soot, devastating Lewis once again. Just in time for dinner. Back to the bowler hat guy. Doris gives him control of a miniature Doris, so he can watch along.
Aha! There you are. Now, to lure him out of the house. I know! I'll blow it up! Yes! Listen! No, it won't work. Then he'll be dead.
This guy, man, he's hilarious. Like, one of the funniest Disney villains out there. I mean, he's next to Hades, I swear.
Oh, I know! I'll turn him into a duck. Yes, it's so evil.
You don't know the half of it, buddy. We join the Robinsons for dinner, and this is one of the few scenes that we see the family interact and really delve into their personalities. It gets fun and ridiculous in a good sort of way. We see that Carl is having trouble with a peanut butter and jelly gun like the one at the beginning of this movie. Wilbur sees this as a perfect opportunity to give Lewis some confidence. He gets him to help repair it. Apparently the singing frogs that we've been seeing throughout the video, and I haven't been playing their music for copyright reasons, have their own bar. And these guys, like everything else, are pretty much awesome. The bowler hat guy uses the miniature bowler hat to take control of the frogs. And of course, he instructs the frog to seize the boy, who is like 20 times his size, in a room full of people.
I'm just not so sure how well this plan was thought through.
The bowler hat guy isn't the only one who's failed. Lewis's peanut butter and jelly machine explodes again. However, the Robinson family doesn't get angry with a failure. They talk about some of the positive aspects of failure, how we can learn from our failures for one, and that even though we fail and it can hurt, we need to keep trying. And they really hammer it in. Speaking of keep trying, the bowler hat guy decides to ditch the singing frog for a larger minion.
If I should tell Doris. No, I'll make it a surprise.
Lewis lets it slip that he's an orphan, and then everyone gets attacked by a T-Rex. This is perhaps one of the stranger animated movies that you will ever see. We begin to see a particularly intense fight scene where all the Robinsons try their best to take out the dinosaur. It's definitely a cool fight scene. I mean, they're fighting a T-Rex in the future. It really makes you wonder how nobody has really heard of this movie. And most of this movie still presents very good humor. Although since this is the joke that most people tend to remember from the film, this particular one has been kinda beaten down. During the fight scene, Wilbur manages to knock the hat off of the dinosaur, and the Frog Mafia disposes of him. Lewis is just impressed with how much the Robinsons have sacrificed for him, giving him the feelings of family, because that is what family does. They sacrifice for each other. Franny decides that the Robinsons want to adopt Lewis. Considering any time travel plot ever, that is an incredibly dangerous proposition. Considering this movie's plot, that is an especially dangerous proposition. So, Wilbur reveals that Lewis is from the past by revealing his hair. And this is after Lewis says yes to being adopted. This is like one of the harshest things in any Disney movie ever. Excepting, the obvious. Unlike Chicken Little though, this came out because of an accident and lack of knowledge. It's integrated into the plot. This isn't here because someone was an absolutely selfish prick. Yeah, Wilbur was kind of selfish and clearly did many things wrong, but it wasn't like he was ever trying to hurt anyone. Speaking of Wilbur, he is in major trouble for breaking a time machine, bringing Lewis to the present-future place, letting the other time machine get stolen, and now promising Lewis that he would be able to see his mom. And Wilbur reveals that he lied about that too. This gets Lewis pissed off. The bowler hat guy comes to him using that weird echoing voice thing that villains often have. The bowler hat guy makes a deal. If Lewis repairs the memory scanner, then the bowler hat guy will take him to see his mother. They take Lewis to a derelict old building and get him to repair the machine, and to tell them exactly how it works. Then he immediately crosses Lewis, and finally everything comes together. It's revealed that Lewis is Wilbur's dad. We also learned that this is Goob, like 30 years later, bent on revenge. Because Wilbur kept him up all those nights for like weeks, he fell asleep during that game. He allowed this failure to make him bitter, and he grew especially bitter towards Lewis, or Cornelius, and his many successes. They make it very clear that that's the point.
What's up? Cool binder.
Hey, Goop, wanna come over to my house today?
They all hated me.
It's his bitterness, not actually his failures. And it shows the darker side of both focusing and ignoring your failures. Goob tried to destroy Robinson Industries rather ineffectually, but then ran into Doris. We learned that Doris was made to be a helping hat. Unfortunately, she was incredibly evil and controlled the minds of those who wore her. She was dismantled and locked away. But then she escaped, and they teamed up. Doris decided to use the time travel, and Goob provided the perfect date on which to travel back to. When Wilbur left the garage door open, the alarm didn't engage, and that gave them the perfect opportunity to steal the time machine.
I had no idea.
Shut up! And don't call me Goob! How many evil villains do you know who could pull off a name like Goob?
Quite a few, actually. On the roof, Carl and Wilbur rescue Lewis and the memory scanner. They're at the home stretch, and then Carl pretty much gets killed. Goob goes back in time to present the invention as his own. Wilbur practically begs Lewis to get the time machine fixed, up until the point where he disappears into the ether. The world becomes largely a dystopia as everything begins to change. We see that in the past present, Goob presented the helping hats to the inventing company. They were mass produced, and they pretty much began to take over the world. Then they straight up killed Goob, and Lewis gets attacked by all of the zombie Robinsons. At this one point, Lewis absolutely cannot give up. Quickly, he gets to work trying to fix the time machine before it falls into a pit, and he saves it just in time, flying through the dystopia, while being chased by a giant hat or weapon. I had no idea you could make bowler hats look intimidating. Humanity has been enslaved by these hats, and they pretty much turn the world into a giant shithole. Why do no evil villains ever want a nice-looking Earth? I don't get it. They always want to turn it into like a smoky factory thing. Lewis gets cornered in a tunnel.
Why did I ever invent that stupid hat?
With this idea, he travels back to the signing and reveals Doris's evil plan to Goob. That enrages Doris, and she immediately tries to attack Lewis.
I am never going to invent you.
Wait a minute, let me think about this. Okay, so Doris caused this whole plot to happen, right? So how did any of this happen? Her teaming up with Goob to steal a time machine and to ruin Lewis's future if Lewis never invented her.
Excellent question.
And, Lewis was originally going to see his mother in the memory scanner, right? If he actually succeeded in doing that and continued his quest to find her, how would that have changed his future? Okay, to be honest, it doesn't bother me that much. Time travel plots rarely get this 100% right. Even the most famous time travel movies of all time have problems when it comes to the logic. Like I said before, the story that follows time travel logic perfectly does not have time travel. A better question to ask, instead of it making sense, is it internally consistent? Does time travel work the same way each and every time? And unfortunately with Meet the Robinsons, the answer is no. When Doris ended Lewis's future as an inventor, she stopped herself from getting invented, and the broken time machine should not exist in the dystopian future. If you really examine the time travel logic in this movie, it gets very confusing. I'm just not entirely sure that it was thought through. But like I said before, the story is probably the weakest aspect of this movie, but the other attributes of the movie are so good that I can not ignore its failure, but forgive its failure. The strength in this movie is both its message and its heart, which presents itself better than most of the other Disney movies. Goob gets invited to be a member of the Robinson family, but he actually ends up disappearing. The only message he leaves behind is his checklist, which he used throughout the movie. One final option: he doesn't know what to do with himself now. For this movie being so weird and quirky, this moment is very sad and somber. Finally, Lewis gets to meet his future self. This allows Lewis to get a glimpse of everything.
Want to see the one I'm most proud of?
Yeah.
Oh, no. That one. It was our first real invention.
The memory scanner, the one that started everything. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that most people, most artists, inventors, they all remember their first real creation. Everything you've done before was just learning or practice. I like how this is presented. The message here is much happier because it gives Lewis a happy ending, but it makes him actually have to work for his happy ending. It wasn't just handed to him. We have a heartwarming ending with the Robinsons, and then Wilbur takes Lewis back to the past, when he was dropped off at the orphanage. This scene was a really smart addition to the movie, even with the subtler details. Look at Wilbur's expression, knowing that he's risking his entire future and his existence by doing this. And it really shows how well the lesson has sunk into Lewis. Instead of trying to change the bad things that have happened to us, we can focus on the future, keep moving forward, and make it a better place. So, Lewis heads to the science fair. He remembers to wake Goob up, and then he begs for a second chance. The scientist there, originally judging the competition, doesn't see any reason against it. Lewis, of course, needs a volunteer. He inputs the day of her wedding. The invention works great, and we see that this scientist married Bud. The pieces of Lewis's future come together, and the movie ends with a very poignant quote, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out how well this seems to parallel what the company Disney was going through at the time that this movie came out. Is Meet the Robinsons a perfect movie? Not by any stretch of the imagination. At times, the story is all over the place, and as I pointed out, the time travel logic doesn't make any sense, even by time travel movie standards. However, it strongly makes up for its weaknesses in its humor, but mostly in its message and its heart. Living with your failures is a hard thing to do, especially when they start to pile up, but it enables the best futures for ourselves if we learn where we went wrong and persevere. And at times it seems like you just hit brick wall after brick wall, and everything you worked for stalls. But once you get past that, if you can get past that, if you can keep going, there are rewards on the other side. We can choose to give up, we can choose to ignore our failures, we can choose to blame others, or we can improve. And it is only one of these choices that gets us a brighter future. It's worth noting that the people who made this film certainly took its message to heart. What will you do?
Somebody needs you,
and that's how it starts. Someone believes you'll come through. You're scared, so what? I'll bet you've got a possible hero in you. It's more than courage or just being strong. Those things are easy to do. Have faith, take heart,